Sometimes love isn't enough. As an adoptive mom, people would often say this to me, as if to imply I couldn't love my son enough to change behaviors or heal his trauma, so I should probably just give up. At least that's how I took those four powerful words, which had buried themselves deeply in my mind, leading me to doubt my ability to parent my child. Sometimes love isn't enough. That is the truth. Oftentimes, you need love and powerful, personalized tools to raise a child who's experienced trauma and disrupted attachment, or a child who you're struggling to connect with. I am on a mission to help parents raising kids with a tricky past to show up with unconditional love and practical tools to lovingly manage even the most challenging of times. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Plus, if you like what you hear, I'd love for you to leave a review. Now let's get to the good stuff. Welcome back to Sometimes Love Isn't Enough. So I am your host, Angie Grandt, and for this episode, I want to follow up from our last episode. So last week, we were talking about a concept called mistaken motivations. And so in case you didn't get a chance to listen to it, or, well, quite honestly, repetition is key to changing the way that we think about things and the way that we show up for our kids. So I'm going to do a little bit of a review, but trust me, we're going to get into some new concepts here as well. But mistaken motivations it's been around for decades, and it is a way of looking at behaviors through a different lens. So traditional behavior assessments really look at what the behavior itself looks like, where mistaken motivations takes a totally different approach at looking at behaviors and really looks at behaviors through how are they making the caregiver feel or the person who's interacting feel, not so much about the one displaying the problematic behaviors, which is a very different lens to look at behaviors through, right? We don't tend to look at when our child is, kicking and screaming. We look at the behavior. What are they doing? Perhaps what are they trying to communicate? And I think that that's the connection between these two very different ways of looking at behaviors is ultimately the child is trying to communicate something. But through the lens of mistaken motivation, we can really pinpoint what they're trying to communicate based on how it makes us feel. And this, what I'm sharing here, applies to our parenting relationship. It also applies to our relationships with other adults, because when we think about mistaken motivations, the real driver behind that behavior is that there's an unmet energy need. So we all, as humans, have needs. We have needs to feel lovable and capable. We have needs to feel like we have power over things that impact our life. We also have needs to feel like we belong and that we're valuable. And we also have needs to explore and experiment and feel like we have the freedom to do so. And so early on in life, when we perceive that any of those needs aren't being met, we, not in a conscious way, but our body, our mouth, our behaviors do things to try to get that need met. And sometimes they're in ways that parents don't like or don't care for. But I really want you to start thinking about mistaken motivations as a signal. It's as if the child is, when they're engaging in these mistaken motivations, it's as if your child or your partner is saying, hey, I have this unmet need and I'm not very good at communicating that to you. And so when we identify our own emotional reactions to the people we love, we can look at the approaches differently. As instead of trying to fix the behavior problem, it helps us to look at it through a lens of how can I support success? How can I help meet that need that is so clearly this child or this person in my life is trying so hard to communicate it with me. And I'm not saying that it's our job to completely fulfill everybody else's needs, but if it's somebody that we love, somebody that we care about, and they're telling us that they have an unmet need, then, we get to choose what we do about that. And I am working in my own relationships and trying to recognize these things and to shift the way that I'm responding because we're all so uniquely different. So we've also been talking a little bit about human design. We're going to be digging much deeper into that in a few episodes, but I also want to just throw out there that all of us, because we have our own unique energetic blueprint, we all have different energetic needs. And so some people's design is more likely to need more attention. Some people are designed to need to feel more empowered or to maybe question their lovability. It's in our energetic blueprint. It's part of our lesson plan. So if say for example you have a child who is born with this susceptibility to question their lovability based on their energetic design, and then the feedback that they're getting and is is encouraging them to feel about themselves one way or another, well, they're more likely to engage in perhaps behaviors that help remind them that they're lovable. And sometimes those behaviors might not be what we want to see, but the purpose behind it is a child trying to seek some evidence that they're lovable. And and I say this with such a compassionate heart because I know when my son was younger, I love him so, so incredibly much. And my decisions were driven by that love, right? I love him so much and I wanted to end his suffering. His behaviors were so challenging and were creating this ripple effect on his social relationships at school, on his relationships with myself, with other family members. I saw and felt the pain of all of these behaviors, and I was trying to fix the behaviors. Meanwhile, had I known about mistaken motivations, had I been able to look at those behaviors through a different lens, had I been able to take a step back and say, like, oh, he's questioning whether or not he's loved. I knew that at a cognitive level, right? And I would say that to people, but I didn't see that as the pure driver of the behaviors that we were seeing. When I look back to when my son was younger and we went through several years of very challenging behaviors, so challenging for me to handle, and I felt like I'm so skilled and experienced at handling behaviors, but at home I felt like such a failure when it came to supporting his success. And my desire to help him, like I said, was driven by my love for him and compassion for him. But when I'm being very honest with myself and go through this list of his needs to feel unconditionally loved, well, I was giving him a lot of information that perhaps he wasn't. And that's not what I wanted to do, right? As mom, I promised his biological mom that I would love him unconditionally. But the message I was giving him was very different. The message I was giving him, I imagine, had to portray to him that I love you when you're behaving good, and when you're misbehaving, I withhold my love. And I didn't mean to do it. I wasn't doing it consciously by any means. I was protecting myself, I was protecting my own heart, but at what consequence for him? Or if I go down the list to the next thing, right? Did my son feel like he had power over things in his own life? Well, I can't speak for him, but a child who's been put into an out of home placement has lost a ridiculous amount of power in their own life just with that one simple change, right? He didn't get to choose what family he was in. And I know we could all argue like we don't get to choose our family. We don't. But when he felt grounded in where he was, even if it was chaotic or stressful or whatever it might have been, he lost control over that. The next one on the list, that his ability to experiment and explore. Well, as I was seeing more behaviors, I to keep him safe is what I had. convince myself of, but I had more and more parameters about his ability to explore and experiment that, he had a lot of supervision because I was afraid that somebody or he might get hurt. Well, imagine what that does to a child who, again, like my decisions came from pure love and pure compassion and trying to support his development and trying to help him thrive. Yet I was giving him the message that perhaps my love wasn't unconditional. Perhaps he didn't have power or say over things that impacted him. I was giving him the message that it wasn't safe for him to explore and experiment with things. I was also giving him the message, unconsciously, mind you, right? The words that I said to him, I tried to be so supportive and understanding. I'm not a yelling mom. It takes a lot for me to lose my cool. But I now look back at that message that I was giving my son was that perhaps he didn't have the same value in our family that maybe my daughter did. Those are words that I would hear him say that I'm being treated unfairly because I'm not your biological child, or I'm the outsider, or I don't belong here. He would say, I don't belong here. My son would say words like, just send me off to a foster family. His words were screaming at me, sometimes literally, but screaming at me that he didn't feel like he belonged. He didn't feel like he had value in the family. He didn't feel like he could experiment and explore, that he had power over his own life, or that he was loved unconditionally. And so when I look at his behaviors through that lens, the solution was not what I was doing. What I was doing was adding on more therapy and getting more testing and trying to find another diagnosis to try and solve what I viewed as the problem. If we could just heal him, then the behaviors would go away. Well, through my own inner work and working on myself and not even realizing that I was working on mistaken motivations, but through my own work and really healing myself and my sense of self, I was then able to show up for my son differently, very differently. And I was able to take a step. I made a very conscious decision that I wouldn't be addressing behaviors anymore at all, not at all, not in a teaching capacity, because I know that my son knows right from wrong. And I know in my heart that when we were experiencing behaviors in the past, it was because he was trying to communicate something. He was trying to say, Mom, I have these really, really, really unmet energetic needs and I can't do it myself and I need help. But I didn't know that. So I'm not beating myself up about that by any means. I didn't know. I know that I parented him with such love and compassion, but I'm also very aware that the way that it was perceived by him was me really reinforcing all of those unmet needs for him. And so this is my message to you is that in order to really take that first step towards understanding your child's unmet energetic needs, understanding their mistaken motivations, that first step is you. That first step is you really exploring with yourself whether or not you feel like you are unconditionally loved. That first step really is exploring with yourself whether or not you feel like you have power over things that matter to you in your life. That first step really is exploring your own energetic needs to feel powerful, to feel loved, to feel like you can experiment and explore, to feel that to know, to stand in your value and to know that you belong. Because that's the real work of starting to address behaviors with our kids, right? Last episode, I shared a few practical things, but if I'm being honest from my heart of a mom, as a grandma now, if I'm being honest, as somebody who has specialized in child psychology and child development since high school, so for several decades now, if I'm being honest, if your energetic needs aren't being met, you're going to continue to struggle with meeting your child's energetic needs. So that very first step of really addressing your child's behaviors, that first step is you. And really asking yourself those questions and not in a way of beating yourself up like, oh my gosh, I don't feel lovable or I don't feel like I have power, right? Like I encourage you to ask yourself those questions, not in a way of beating yourself up, but in a way of, okay, so on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being not lovable at all, and 10 being like, bring it on. Like I love and I give love and I feel so open to love. If on that scale, you're like, I'm kind of a 5, then follow that up with, what do I need to do to move that needle up to a 10 or even an 8? What do I need to do to move that needle? Because if you're operating from a place of lack, if you're operating from a place of your cup is always empty or pretty empty or dry, then it really is impossible to show up for the way that you know you need to for your kids, right? Like you can do the things, you can go through the motions, but when your cup isn't full, it's impossible. I have shared this before, but I'll share it again. The analogy of if you're not filling your own, not just your self-care cup, right? That's self-care is important, but really addressing your energetic needs is first. And so if you're doing little things to put a little bit of a drop of coffee into your coffee cup, you're going to have to keep going back and keep going back and keep going back to refill your cup because it's never really full. And so, what I am suggesting is that you ask yourself questions that help put you in a place where you start to be more open to the idea that there are solutions. Because no matter what your past is, no matter what you've experienced, no matter what stories you're telling yourself about who you are, there are strategies that can help untangle those stories so that you can move forward. I know in my coaching practice, I use quite a few different tools. I've been using EFT or the emotional freedom technique with my clients, and I see powerful shifts happening as my clients are able to let go of old stories, let go of that junk, just leave it at the door and move on. But between EFT or tapping, mindset coaching, and then the one of the most powerful ways that I have found to help parents really stop losing it with their kids, to really start connecting with them, is to really understand our own energetic needs. And once we have a good grasp of that and we understand how to tap into what's right for us, then we can start understanding our kids and start understanding their needs. Because, like I said, when we're looking through the lens of mistaken motivations, well, some designs have have are more susceptible to needing different things than other designs. So some designs need more attention than other designs do, and that's okay. When we know that, we can show up differently. We know it, as a parent, when we have more than one child, or as somebody who works with kids, we know kids' needs are so different. And you can have one kid who's pretty independent. They don't really seek a lot of feedback. They don't really need a lot of encouragement. And then we have other kids who it seems like we can't possibly give them enough to fill their cup. Well, the truth is that you can. The approach has to be tweaked a little bit based on their energetic needs, based on what we know about childhood psychology, that I I want you to leave this episode today knowing that there is hope, but it might take a totally different approach than you're using. It might take a totally different way of looking at behaviors through the lens of mistaken motivations and through your child's human design, and really being honest with ourselves about whether or not the action that we're taking is the right action for our kids and our relationships and ourselves. So that's what I have for you today, is that really at the foundation of addressing mistaken motivations, which, man, they can drive us crazy. I've experienced all of them in my own home. The um, mistaken motivation of attention or power struggles. Oh my goodness, the power struggles with the 2-year-old in the house right now are, it's fascinating to watch how that child's behaviors impact all four of the adults in the house so very differently, which just speaks to me so loudly about that Some of us engage in power struggles with the toddler, and some of us don't so much. And it's because of how we feel about it. It's how we look at it. It's the lens through which we look at that behavior. If we look at that behavior as a problem of a misbehaving child, well, then we're going to address it like a behavior problem. But if instead we look at it as an unmet energetic need, well, then we figure out how to meet that need in a totally different way. And I can't speak to enough about one, how I wish I knew this when my son was younger. Well, I mean, I wish that I knew this when he was younger for the sake of him not having to go through such struggles. But if I'm being super honest with you and with myself, I had to go through it because I had to feel that pain of really missing the mark with my son. I had to get stuck in that loop of doing it wrong, even though I was trying so incredibly hard. I had to get stuck in that loop in order for me to really see where the problem was in the pattern. I really had to get stuck in that loop so that I could help you. So I would love to connect with you. I don't talk about this a ton, but I do offer a free consult. So in that consult, I go through a really powerful exercise where I actually will help you see exactly where the problem is, quite honestly. And not that I'm telling you you're the problem, but I help you see exactly what those things are in your current relationships that are creating so much frustration for you. So when people leave my consults, they leave with some really practical things and feel really empowered about that you have choice over this. You don't have to keep feeling frustrated or resentful or angry. You can do something about it. So if you're interested in booking a free consult, the info is in my show notes. I'm in the process of updating my website, so maybe by the time you listen to this, I'll have a shiny new website. But yeah, click the show notes, and I would love to connect with you and help you to really start meeting your own needs, meeting your kids' needs, understanding those mistaken motivations, and really dig into your design so you really understand what you need and your kids need. So that's it. I hope you have a lovely day. That's totally up to you. I hope that you found this episode so incredibly powerful. Thank you for joining us for Sometimes Love Isn't Enough. If you resonated with what you heard here, please subscribe to this podcast and give us a review. You can also follow us on all the socials. Check the show notes for all the details about how to start tackling behaviors and creating a powerful, loving relationship with your child, a child who needs your love the most. And if your gut's telling you that it's time for a change now, book a free consult. I'd love to help you love unconditionally and show you that you have that power within you.